Jacob, appreciate you. I got um, our assistant athlete performance coach and head powerlifting CrossFit coach Devin Hance on here. My GA Jill Brown and one of our interns and baseball player all-star Anthony Hansen on here as well. So appreciate you joining us. And if you wouldn't mind, why don't you just give everybody on here just a little maybe background of where you've been so far, then we'll start firing questions at you.
Okay. Career started out as an intern at Central Iowa. It's where I did undergrad and there all 4 years. It started out just like freshman year. I had always played sports in high school, and when I went to college, I didn't play sports, and so I really missed the, I guess you could call it like the team atmosphere, just like having people to rely on. And so I actually reached out to the wrestling coach, and I was like, "Hey, like I did wrestle a little bit in high school, but not a lot. I'm just missing the team aspect. Like, do you have a spot, or like, can I try out?" And I'm not a very good wrestler, and I think he knew that. And so he called in the strength conditioning coach, Jake Anderson, at that time. At Central, I believe at that time was like one of the few D3s that actually had more than one full-time strength coach. We had two, which is pretty unique. And so he called him in and basically like pawned me off on him, which I'm really thankful for now. But at that point, I was like, man, this is kind of dumb. Like, I didn't come here for this. But, and so I just started interning with them and was there all 4 years, graduated my junior summer. I went out to Harvard and interned for Tim Mullen and James Frazier, which ends up coming in down the road. So I interned there over that summer. After that, I went to Northwest Missouri State for my grad work. That's where I got to know Gage. Was there 2 years, had a really good experience. It was a lot of fun. It was like a coaching grind, as I'm sure you guys are used to. Like, you know, we'd run groups 5 a.m. till 11, get a quick lift in, and then run groups 1 to 5 again. It was a lot, but it was a lot of fun too, because pretty much everybody there was just a lot of fun to work with, and we were all fairly young. Like, we loved working out, we loved coaching, and so it was pretty easy to do those long hours. After Northwest, I moved back home for a summer and just like worked landscaping work and applied for like 70 jobs probably. And it took all summer up until like the last couple weeks of July for me to actually like get offered something. And basically like I was planning for alternatives like military or something else, because I had student loans kicking in, you know, that pressure that I'm sure you guys know about. And so I was just like really nervous because I'd interviewed for a couple and I hadn't really like gotten any offers. I was like, oh shoot, like this is not good. This sucks. And then Ike Hammerly, who I'd known, he was a strength coach in my hometown for an NAIA school. I just kind of went over there and I knew him via just training and talking shop. He called me, was like, hey, our strength coach just left. Do you want to interview? And so I phone interviewed on, I think it was Friday, in-person interviewed on Monday, was offered Tuesday or Wednesday, and then I started the next week. And so it was like really fast. And it was just crazy to go from basically thinking I wasn't going to get in the profession to, okay, next week you're starting a full-time job. Here's 19 sports. Like, it was crazy. And so I was at Luther for a year and ran that pretty much by myself plus like 2 to 3 interns, which if I didn't start an internship program there, I would have been drowning in my own sports. So I'm really thankful to them. And most of them have gone. I think one of them's a GA at Penn now. Another one, Derek Stork, is the wrestling strength at App State. So like they've gone and done great things, which is awesome. And that shows like how valuable I think places having an internship program can be, because especially at Division III or small schools, like you have to take on so much responsibility as an intern or a GA, and it really puts you ahead of the pack, in my opinion. Whereas if you were an intern or a GA at like a really big school, you might not have that responsibility that sets you apart from other people. But so I was at Luther for a year, met my wife there. We had been dating like 6 months when I got offered a job at Harvard, and I basically told her, look, I won't take the job if you don't want to go. And she's crazy. So she said, okay, let's go. And so we moved across the country together, barely knowing each other. And Got married about a year later to Boston. It's really expensive and the apartment market is awful. And so we lived in this dog shit apartment. Like I'm talking bottom tier, guys. Like we had 2 window ACs in this little thing and we couldn't keep it cool to save our lives. And so we would literally close our bedroom doors and blast the ACs just so we could sleep at night. It was just crazy. And that first year was just like a really uncomfortable year. I wasn't making shit for money. We were coaching like Ivy League hours are crazy long. And it was just like a miserable year, but it was good because it brought us really close together and kind of like hit the reset switch for me because I had gone from being a head guy for all my sports and making all the calls to an assistant again, which is like a hard transition in my opinion. But I was there that first year, got promoted to assistant director my second year, which made living a little bit easier. You know, didn't have to worry about money as much. Thankfully, my wife's a hustler and was working basically 2 jobs, and she made like probably 20 grand more than I did, which is awesome. But so she basically kept us afloat that whole time. She was the admissions counselor for the University of Alabama, like remotely, and then coached high school track on the side. And if you've ever been to like the Northeast, like high schools pay their sport coaches pretty well. I think she made like, I want to say 12 to 15 grand indoor, outdoor, which is crazy. It's like you're there from 3 to 5 every day, and that's it. So you're getting paid pretty well for it. But after my second year at Harvard, one of my best friends, Nick DeMarco, called me. If you follow Elon Performance, like he's the mastermind behind all that. But he offered me the director of basketball job down at Elon. I was like, let's do it because I love him. I want to work for him. It was a really great experience. And the reason I wouldn't have been there for a lot longer is I got offered this job in Minnesota, which is where my parents are from. Leah's parents live a couple hours south. It's football, like basically like everything lined up for it to be the perfect job to take. And that's what I kept telling Leah. It's like, we're going to be here for a while unless the absolute perfect thing comes open. Because I loved working for Nick and that staff is awesome. The school's like behind him 100%, giving him, you know, they just made another part-time, full-time, like they're investing money in him a lot, which is hard to get schools to do. But yeah, then we moved here to Minnesota. Been here about a year and a half now. It's been great. I mean, I've always wanted to be in football. Football did a lot for me in high school in regards to just like keeping me out of trouble and teaching me a lot of things about life. And it basically, you know, I didn't know it at the time, but it kind of pushed me towards strength conditioning, maybe subconsciously. And it was just kind of like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. But that's pretty much my journey through strength conditioning. I've been really lucky and good people have been very good to me.
That's awesome, Jake. And that leads me to my first question I have for you, because if my staff was paying attention to your bio, there is you've been at every level in a collegiate setting. You know, you've been at D2, D3, then D1, obviously at Elon, which is kind of a smaller D1 in Harvard, and then now you're in big time Power 5 football. So you've kind of seen the whole spectrum of strength conditioning, especially at the collegiate level. So I guess just kind of open-ended, did you notice just any general differences maybe between levels? Not necessarily in the athletes or anything, but just, I don't know, just answer that question however you want.
Yeah. You know, honestly, like at the core of it, I would say the answer is no, just because, you know, there's things that differ for sure. But at the core of it, like you still have to deal with sport coaches. And that's where I think a lot of strength coaches run into issues is that community. So there's always egos at play and there's always, you know, you have to educate a sport coach on this. And it all comes down to relationships. And it's part of it. Basically our 2 starting running backs who both tore their ACLs the prior year. And so like basically if we didn't have those guys back and they were healthy, our chances of winning games the next season was I wouldn't say slim, but it'd be a lot harder, right? And so the pressure in that sense changes to where it's my responsibility to make sure that. So like that part's changed, but in my like I've never really looked at it that way of where it's like, my job depends on my performance. It's more of just like it's changed. But there's definitely like significant differences because like you go where the kids are paying their way to be there. It's really easy to get buy-in because they want to be there. And honestly, like it's the same at D2 because like most Division II kids probably aren't on scholarship, and if they are, it's probably a partial. I know Northwest did a lot of partials, and so the part of the kids wanting to be there is, I think, the biggest difference because we have some kids on roster that might not love football, but they're either like insanely like huge or just a freak athletically, and that's just what they are doing to potentially make millions so they don't have to worry about anything else the rest of their life, which is really foreign to me because most of my time was spent with kids that are playing the sport because they love it, not playing the sport because they're good at it. And that's kind of been a eye-opening thing to me because I never experienced that for most of my career, because most of my career was honestly at D3, if you count like internships and stuff. But what else? I mean, yeah, just like at the core of it with relationships, it doesn't really change. Obviously you have limited resources at Division III, Division II. You have to be smarter with your money, be more creative. You got to fight to have staff, like all these different things. But I think a lot of people say this now, but like some of the better strength coaches are at smaller schools because of that fact. Like you have to be a lot smarter with what you have. You don't have everything handed to you. And I think it creates a sense of humility that the FBS football honestly is completely missing. Quite frankly, I think there's very few that are in FBS football that are truly humble. Like I think there's definitely like some of the better ones are, but it's definitely a plague on football. Like wherever money's involved and a lot of it, like there's going to be a lot of issues. But yeah, at the core, like it's all relationships. If you're good with people, like you're going to be good no matter what level you're at.
That's great. All right, staff, fire away at coach here.
Bring it on.
Yeah, so my question would be, you've obviously been to a lot of different schools. So how has your programming changed throughout the years, going from D3 school with minimal equipment? You went to these Ivy League schools at Minnesota and the small D1 schools. So how's your programming adapted with other coaches you've worked with and things like that?
Yeah, I would say like general philosophy and system wise, it really hasn't changed. I was brought up in the old school, Iowa football kind of realm where it's, we choose our movements based on them being ground-based, three-dimensional, multi-joint, which, that I feel like honestly everybody uses that line now. Like it's kind of been like common knowledge. And I honestly think, across the board, most at least good or average strength, no matter if they recognize it or not. And so that's become like the normal. And it used to be, you dial back like 4 years, if you drop that line and kind of use the old Iowa adages, that set you apart. Like people are like, oh, that's really smart, and I guess when it comes to like true selection, like what exercises do I use? Has that changed? Yes. I used to be, especially at Luther, I was a competitive Olympic weightlifter. So we did a lot of cleans. We did a lot of snatches. We back squatted. Like we did all these things just because that's what I believed in. That's kind of what I was brought up in, heavy investment when I was there. But, you fast forward through to now, like I don't really do Olympic lifts. I don't program for our entire football team, but I do reconditioning, and basically all of my guys that come back, especially like the ACL guys, there's no really reason for me to clean or snatch. Like we can get the same adaptation out of doing weighted throws, jumps, Basically, like any way you can skin a cat, like doing jammer is going to give you just as much of a benefit. So I think that's what strength conditioning needs to realize is there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but there's definitely an optimal way. And optimal isn't the same for everybody. It's not the same for every situation. And so if you're in a situation where you can actively coach snatch and clean really well and your athletes end up being pretty good at it, maybe that's maybe that's the correct route for you to go. But if you're in a situation where you're a coach stretched thin, like you're a football strength coach at Division II level and you got to track 50 kids at once, probably not the best thing to do because I got to coach 50 guys doing a clean at once. It's going to be hard. Whereas if you tell them, hey, grab a set of heavy dumbbells or a heavy trap bar and jump with it, that's super easy, right? So I think it really depends on the situation. And I think the best strength coaches are the ones that are the most adaptable. So whatever you're given, you just make the most of it. But at the core, like doing athletic movements that are in all planes and they look athletic is what's important. You know, it seems really simple, but you'd be surprised how many people just do things that don't seem athletic, you know? I think that's where the biggest change, I think, for me has been a greater emphasis on single leg movements. And I think that's been a movement across the board with strength conditioning the past couple of years. But I think that's something we really missed the boat on because we had this huge influx of, you know, it's a young profession and we get all these people in that love lifting weights. And I think that was a plague on the beginning years of strength conditioning because, you know, everyone's like getting into the profession because they like powerlifting. They're getting into the profession because they liked CrossFit or weightlifting like me, right? But when you let your own personal beliefs affect your programming, I think that can be a real issue. And that's something that I dealt with at Luther for sure. Like there are definitely ways that I could have been way better back then. But if you're not adapting, you're falling behind. And that's what I truly believe in. And, you know, I've just tried to adapt as fast as possible. Like if there's something new that seems like it's smarter than what I'm doing at the time, I switch right away. As long as it's backed up and it makes sense. But yeah, sorry, it's like a really open-ended answer to your question, but truly at the end of the day, like work backwards from the game and whatever makes sense to do to make them a better athlete, you got to do it, hands down.
Well, before anybody jumps in, I want to follow up on that. Because I think I've told this story before, but one piece of advice you gave me when I was interning at Northwest and kind of starting the whole programming thing, you said, you know, programming can be really hard, but it doesn't need to be. Keep it simple. And that is a common theme throughout your whole answer there, is that maybe exercise selection and stuff has changed, but the underlying core of how you program is extremely simple. And then, like you said, there's a million different ways to skin a cat. You're just using different methods maybe to accomplish the same simple principle, correct?
Yep. And, you know, what I often say to, you know, athletes that ask questions about it or just like other coaches, like what you do matters, but taking care of the what is super easy. Like you read a few books and you make sure it makes sense and it's an athletic movement, right? Same thing with the why. Like explaining to somebody why you're doing something is really easy, right? You've read the books, you're educated on it. You probably selected that exercise for a certain reason. And that's easy because they'd be like, hey, why do we do a barbell split squat? Well, single leg strength transfers more than blah, blah, blah. And it's going to help you prevent knee injuries. Really easy, right? It's super easy to tell the athlete. It's easy for them to buy into. But, you know, I think the biggest thing that separates people, it's not the what or the why. Like those are so easy, especially nowadays when our profession is getting older and the, I would say, average intelligence level is rising, which is great. But I think what people are starting to find out is like what's the most important is like how you do things. Like what is your intent? And, you know, you could have somebody that does a set of back squat and just kind of like goes through the motions, does the reps. Doesn't mean they're not trying. Then you have somebody else that is super intent with it and basically gives every rep their complete all. And if those two athletes were the same, the person with more intent and with more, what we would call it here in Minnesota, like more how, is going to get better than the other guy. And so, it's really easy to take care of the first two, but are you taking care of the third one? And that's something we put a really heavy emphasis on. How you do anything is how you do everything. It's super common saying. But truly, like in essence, if you want to get better, that's what matters. You can do, how many football teams run the same or similar offense, and some are successful and some aren't. That's how you do it. That's it. Really simple.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Coach.
Yeah.
So I guess our staff just thinks alike because Gage and Devin's questions were both my first two. So, what would you say is your training philosophy, and how has it changed over the years? Like, has it changed based off of like being a director and now you're with just football? How has that changed, if it has at all?
Yeah. So I would say like training philosophy wise, it stayed fairly similar just because pretty much everywhere I've worked, it's been from a similar coaching tree. And so there hasn't really been like I'm working for somebody that didn't come from what I was brought up in. And so there really hasn't been a drastic change of, this is completely new. I would say the biggest change was honestly when I went and GA'd at Northwest, because I was brought up for 4 years in the central strength curriculum where it was very Iowa based. It was all the 3-dimensional ground based multi-joint stuff, linear and lateral PAL, like all these things that most programs that branched off there use. And then I went to Northwest, and if you've ever met Joe Quinlan, like he's a really, really good coach. That's his biggest strength. And he'll admit it 10 times out of 10. Like he's a really good coach, and his X's and O's are probably his limitation. And I'm probably the same way. But when I got there, I was like, man, we're doing some like crazy shit. This is a lot of volume. Like we're doing bear crawls on frozen turf with snow on it, like all this stuff that like didn't make sense in my head because it wasn't what I'd done before. And it took me like a couple years of being there, and then literally when I graduated and left, I was like, oh, that all made perfect sense because it was a different philosophy, but his athletes had 100% belief in what they were doing, and they had like this fanatical cult-like how about them. Like everybody there was just crazy. And it's just a weird thing because, everyone thinks that they were just like really good at these sports because they had stud athletes. But honestly, I think it's because of Joe Quinlan and the culture that they had in that athletic department. Like everybody was behind Bearcat athletics, and they had this crazy sense of like everybody's going to win no matter what. Like we're just going to go really hard. It's all going to take care of itself. And so I think at the really it just comes down to like the belief, and my overall philosophy really hasn't changed. The only time it's ever changed has kind of been that going to Northwest where I had to adapt to the guy I was working for's philosophy. And that doesn't mean you lose like your core beliefs and values, but it means you adapt to who you're working for, and hopefully you end up believing in what they stand for. And that's what it took me like a year to actually adapt to, hey, maybe our X's and O's aren't perfect, but if we do it really well, it doesn't matter. And so the second year I kind of actually gained belief in that, and it made me a lot better coach. So I would say just like be open-minded, and there's definitely, there are bad strength coaches out there. Like I think that's pretty evident. And there's people that are negligent with their athletes, like Maryland or, any place that's had a kid die on their watch. Like that's awful. It should never happen. And that just means have an open mind, but also have a line of where this is right and this is wrong. And then when it comes to it, if you're working for somebody, adapt to their philosophy. And then when you leave, you can take what you like and you can discard what you don't. And, I think the biggest piece of advice I would have for somebody that is taking a job where they might not know what that philosophy is when they're going in or like how it's going to work is just open mind and accept it and go all into it. And then down the road, if that's not what you don't, if you don't like it, don't use it. Pretty simple. And then when you have a disagreement or you believe in something differently than the head coach, it's really as simple as just like sitting down and having a conversation. And I think that's something a lot of people don't do in our profession is sit down and have a very genuine conversation where ego is set aside and emotions are set aside. And it's truly what's best for the athlete? Is it A or B? And usually the answer is somewhere in between. But yeah, just be flexible with it. Be open-minded and always be changing because, I think a lot of people think we have the human body figured out, but we really don't. I don't think we're even close. And so today, single leg training might be the big thing. And then, you fast forward 4 years and all of a sudden we're doing split squats on a Smith machine. Like, you never know. You truly never know. Cause like, if you dial back like 10 years, people were doing HIIT on machines for football. And like, look how far we've come now, completely flipped the opposite side. And so, I think the answer is always in the middle, and it's kind of hard for people to not be polarized. Sorry, really broad answer to your question. I'm not a very black or white guy.
Coach, going back to your time out there at Central as a student intern, what are a few of the first things that kind of stuck with you? And then how did you go about just kind of being that student intern that athletes still really saw as a coach that could help them out?
That's a really good question. That was definitely, that was even like a struggle through being a GA, because honestly, at that point, when I graduated Northwest, I was only 24, and there were some athletes there that were 22, maybe 22 and a half. Like, our age gap was really close, and I don't look very old, especially if I wear glasses. And so like, they probably were looking at me at 24 and they're like, damn, is this kid like 20 right now? Like, I don't get it. But yeah, it's balancing that was really hard, especially through undergrad. And I think the best thing that worked for me was that I actually wasn't an athlete. And so I wasn't with the guys 24/7. And there was already like a natural separation. But we had interns that were football guys where essentially like they worked with football and it was good. But where they really shined was when they worked with other sports that they weren't all buddies with. And so that was the one thing I really loved about Central was, even though like my main focus was football and that's what I loved, like my last 2 years I had men's soccer and women's soccer. And I tell you what, working with a female sport made me such a better coach because I had to coach completely differently. I had to have conversations with girls when I'm like 20 years old and like haven't really had a girlfriend. And it's just like weird, It's something that's really funny, but honestly, if you ask any young intern, they're terrified of working with females, especially if they're a male. And it will make them all way better because you have to be good at crucial conversations and being uncomfortable when you're having a conversation. And so it made me a way better coach, honestly. But I think just at Central, what I was really thankful for was they didn't really introduce me to true strength conditioning, like principles and actual educational textbooks until like the last couple of years. Like I didn't read a programming book until I think it was actually my junior year, and it was like Practical Programming by Mark Ripito or something like that. And it's just nuts because the first 2 years were literally all personal development. That's it. Like we were reading books like The Traveler's Gift, The Energy Bus by John Gordon, like books like that. And so they really put a heavy premium on making you a better person before they ever introduced the coaching side. And I think that's something that anywhere should do, because if you're not a good person, you're not going to be a good coach, hands down. It doesn't matter how much you know. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you can't get through to the kid and you're not a good person yourself, and, it's like preaching discipline when you're not disciplined. You're going to get zero buy-in, right? You're like, hey, guys, don't go out and drink alcohol on the weekends. But then you're the first guy on Friday night to go get plastered. Like, probably not going to believe you. And so they really taught me how to be an example. And I really needed that my first 2 years, because the first couple of years of college for kids is like culture shock. Like, you don't have your parents nearby. You have nobody to oversee you. You don't have to do your homework right when you get home. Like all these things that I was struggling with, honestly. And it gave me a ground to stand on so that I could actually develop myself as a person and not have to worry about, why are we doing this? It definitely gave me a really solid base to propel myself forward, which was great. And the best part was like they had that, and it was all super structured. Like I knew exactly what my assignments were. Everything was laid out and planned. And I think that's something that interns deserve to have. Like if you're going to give your time free, like you deserve structure. That way you know what you're going to get. And I think a lot of places, especially like big time football, don't really have like structure for their intern programs. It's more of like, hey, you come here for the logo. Like we're going to, you know, show you what we do. You're going to clean, maybe coach if you're lucky. And then if you're good, maybe you'll get a job down the road. And that's just a disservice in my opinion. Like just having to go somewhere for the logo is awful. I think you should go somewhere for an experience that's going to actually make you better. And if you're going to give your time for free, you deserve something in return. And that doesn't mean like, you know, that interns have to start getting paid. Like there's definitely an exchange of goods. And I think that's where, you know, the line is like a lot of people think, oh, like strength conditioning, everyone needs to get paid more or like this. And I do agree, like salaries need to go up. It's kind of ridiculous how low they are for the amount of expertise that schools are asking for. But at the same time, like if we're not going to pay interns, you need to give them something valuable in return, whether it's experience or, you know, obviously they need to be good to get a recommendation, but like there's got to be some kind of exchange of goods.
Coach, you talked about the self-help books. So like you turned me on to all these. So Noticer, I think these are my favorite ones. Traveler's Gift.
That's my favorite.
That one? I thought this one was your favorite.
No, okay, so yeah, they're both like really close.
Yeah.
I hit both of them at different points in my life. Okay. And so they're both like life-changing to the aspect of like when I read it, there was like an immediate switch that went off. But both of those I read in undergrad. And so, you know, those like the most formative years of your life. Like I truly believe like if you miss the boat on a kid when they're in college or maybe even grad school, like you're missing an opportunity to change the most in that person's life. Because after that, like you have, you know, how many years of habits set in. Like even when we get high school kids in, they already have 18 years of habits. And so, you know, when you get them during those really vulnerable years, you can instill a lot of change for the rest of their life. Whereas if you miss that point, you know, you might not ever get that deep. And it's like the Traveler's Gift. I read I think that was the first book I ever read for the Central Strength Internship Program. And it just like, it blew my mind because I had never read anything that was like that. I don't want to like spoil it if no one's ever read it, but and then The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, I read that I want to say my junior year, and that was right when I started competing in weightlifting, and I was like decent at it. And Way of the Peaceful Warrior is all about like no ego, essentially. And not having a ton of anxiety, which everybody nowadays has tons of anxiety. So like that helped me settle in to like who I was, I guess. So yeah, those are definitely my two favorites. Like Andy Andrews writes bomb-ass books. I like John Gordon and I like The Energy Bus, but honestly, I don't think he even comes close to touching Andy Andrews. So
yeah, The Energy Bus was the first one you gave to me to read.
Yeah, I mean, that's like in my opinion, that's a great intern book because I feel like the main point of it, you know, he talks about being positive and all these different things, but it's more about like liberating yourself to be that positive rather than just like, you know, oh, I'm going to be positive today. It's more of like saying, hey, it's okay to be that.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of young people need because, you know, we regiment their lives so much that let them free a little bit. Maybe they'll actually be who they are.
Yeah. Are there any, you talked about kind of reading those in your undergrad earlier on. Is there any more books or maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be books or podcasts or anything like that you're like has changed maybe how you view things recently?
Let's see. I mean, obviously I know you love extreme ownership and like all of Jocko's stuff. That's definitely been something I really enjoyed. I'm probably like over rigid. I won't say over disciplined because I definitely I love eating chips and that's where my discipline fails. My wife could attest to that. I have like zero discipline when it comes to chips. So like we can go to the grocery store and like buy a big ass bag and I'll get home and be like, hey, can we eat some chips right now? And like they won't last a day and we'll be like, hey, they're gonna last a week. No. But I really like that one just because it's really simple. And I think a lot of places get really complex with, you know, their core beliefs and, you know, what their system is going to be. And he basically, like, you can break the whole book down into discipline equals freedom, and that's it. And that's what I really enjoy about him, is he's so simple. That's been probably like the main one. I'm trying to think of what else I've read that's been pretty good. I mean, I'd like to read a lot of fiction too, just for creativity's sake. I think a lot of people need to stimulate the creative part of their mind. I think we're a very rigid society that's becoming more and more robotic and less creative. So I think if you have like some kind of fiction, like if you like fantasy novels or Game of Thrones or whatever, like I feel like you need to stimulate that side of you, and it'll make you a better coach. But other than that, like I've read a couple psychology books, not textbooks. I hate reading textbooks. That's like my main weakness, I would say. But I basically just call Nick DeMarco if I need to know something scientific. Be like, hey, what's the deal on this? And he'll give me a 10-minute rundown. I'm like, good. And I don't have to waste 2 days reading a book, you know, because he'll read it in like a day and it's fine. But yeah, I mean, I just think as long as you're reading and taking in stuff, it really doesn't matter the material, because, you know, you could read a bad book, but you're still going to gain experience from that person that wrote the book. And so you might not read a book, be like, oh, now I learned that I need to be more positive. You might read something and be like, I don't want to be like that person, so I'm not going to do this. So I think no matter what you do or what you read, you can always learn something from it. And that goes for like everything. You know, if you go to a coaching job that you don't like, just take away what you don't like, and that'll make you a better coach in the future. There's always something to learn from a good book, bad book, good video, bad video. You know, there's always something there.
Yeah. And actually, now you said that, like, you were the one who turned me on to Jocko. And then it seemed like I read it, and then it seemed like the week after he just exploded. Now everybody knows Jocko now, but yeah, my staff knows everything about Extreme. We're covering that in our Tuesday meetings. Does anybody else have any more questions for Coach? All right, then. So we'll finish with just a quick 4-question finisher then. Sound good?
Right on. Yeah.
What are you binge watching right now?
Oh, shoot. What's the show we're watching right now?
Designated Survivor.
Designated Survivor. It's fire.
What's that on? I've heard a couple of people talk that. What is that on?
It's on Netflix, right?
Netflix. All right.
Yeah. It's on Netflix. Essentially, a government building gets blown up, and this guy who was like bottom tier government was the only guy that survived, so he became the president.
Sweet.
Pretty sick.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you watch Ozark?
I'm like 3/4 of the way through Ozark, season 1.
Okay, you got a long ways
But
to go.
Leah hates it, so I don't really get to watch it that often. There's too much murder, she said, and there's always something bad going on. I told her that's the point, but she doesn't get it.
What is the most embarrassing moment you've had coaching your athletes?
The most embarrassing moment? Oh, man. Coaching my athletes? Can you think of anything? I don't know. There's tons of moments. Like, I'm not a social butterfly by no means. Like, I'm not a super outgoing person. Like, if I'm walking down the street, like, I'm not like, hey, what's up? I know you. Like, that's not me. Like, I'll kind of like walk and, you know, just kind of go about my business. So, you know, I would say like more of, shoot, what's the most embarrassing moment? I'm trying to think. Yeah. My voice cracks a lot if I'm yelling really loud.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's probably been that. It really didn't happen to me that much until Harvard when I was running warm-ups. And, like, this weight room's massive. You should just Google an image of the Harvard weight room. It's 12 racks down. So it's, like, basically 35 yards long on each side. And it's really spaced out. And so we have our guys, like, lined up in a straight line all the way down it. And you're running a warm-up on the side over 2 other people doing warm-ups. And so you got to be really loud. And you do that 3 to 4 times a day, like, your voice is bound to be gone. And, man, there were some really big cracks. And it used to really embarrass me. But now it's like if I'm running a warm-up in front of a Division I FBS football team, bunch of tough guys, and it breaks, like, get a couple giggles, but you just keep rolling through it. It's fine.
You just got to embrace it. It is what it is.
Happens to everybody, you know?
Exactly. What is your favorite thing about being a FBS Division I strength coach?
Logos, man. No, I'm just kidding. Honestly, when I first got the job, like my biggest thing, I love the movie Rudy, and his biggest thing was like he just wants to run out of that tunnel, right? And when I first got the job, I was like, man, I just want to run out of that fucking tunnel, like really bad. And I tell you what, like it felt really good. And like you're running out, and I'm like, I'm trying to trot, so like I got some pep in my step, and it was just really cool. It's a different experience, you know, and that's the allure I think for a lot of people to it. And originally, like that was my biggest thing. Like I want to be on the biggest stage possible, you know, not for me, but for the athletes. And you know, I took this from Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner. Like he said, I don't have goals anymore. I just have a mission. And I really love that. And I've tried to adopt that myself to where it's like, you know, I'm not going to set goals anymore. I'm just going to have a mission that I'm going to serve my athletes the best I can and try to change the field of strength conditioning from the better. And the easiest way to do it, in my opinion, is from the top. You attack what the biggest stage is. You have to get to the top of it, and then you can put change down. And so that's my mission. But yeah, I tell you what, like it's different when you run out of tunnel in front of 50, 60,000 people and you got Penn State on the field, and it's a different feeling. Like there's a lot of pressure, and that's the biggest like rush I think for people in FBS is like it's do or die. Like you win, you keep your job, you lose, you don't.
Yeah, and it brings the best out of you too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it can bring the best or the worst. Depends
Right.
on what kind of person you are.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, last one. Just simple advice for a young up-and-coming strength coach.
Yeah. My biggest thing is you have to be an absolute elite person before you can be an elite coach. And I truly believe that's going to be the difference maker in driving our profession forward is we need not like the influx right now is of really smart people, right? Sports science is blowing up. All the new kids getting into the profession are all really smart because there's a lot of good stuff out there. And, you know, everybody knows the basics. Everyone knows the X's and O's. But what's going to set you apart is being a really good person who can deal with other people in a really quick and efficient way. And it all boils down. I was talking to Preston about this literally yesterday. It all boils down to belief in relationships. You know, if you can get your coaches to believe in what you're doing and you have a good relationship with them and your athletes, everything else will take care of itself. And if it doesn't, it just wasn't meant to be. And you just need to keep going forward. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Like, be as well-rounded as possible. You don't need to be, you know, an elite expert on triphasic training. The biggest thing that's going to make you the most marketable and the best coach possible is just be as well-rounded as you can and have extreme belief in what you're doing.
I love it, Jake. And you're the man. I, again, appreciate you spending time with us. I love talking to you, and I hope my staff enjoyed this as well. But you and Leah, stay safe up there. Try not to kill each other during quarantine.
No doubt.
Hopefully those who are married always all come out married still and all that still here and however long this takes.
Yeah, I mean, she worked from home for like the longest time. So this is the most I've ever been home, and we're thriving on it so far. There are a couple moments where she gets a little restless, and you know I'm kind of a homebody, so it's fine. Like I can sit on my couch all day and be okay.
Yeah.
But she gets a little restless and bounces around a little bit. So.
You'll be all right.
I just close my eyes and take a deep breath.
All right, man. Well, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, and good luck with everything up there, man. Appreciate it.
No doubt. Thanks for your time, guys.
See you, bud.
Take care. Peace.
Thanks, Coach.